Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. We've got a great crowd in the room today. It's always good to do this back in person, the way we did pre-COVID, which is hard to believe was 5 years ago. And I know that we also have a large crowd who will be online. We typically have these days about 130 people total who join Grand Rounds every single week. So I really appreciate all of you who are here and appreciate all of you who are online. We are very fortunate today to have James Robinson be our Grand Round speaker. Mr. Robinson is the father of three sons, one of whom was born with a single ventricle heterotaxy caused by primary ciliary dyskinesia. After his son's death at the age of 5, he was inspired to write a memoir about their family's globe-spanning medical journey. The book, titled More Than We Expected, reveals unexpected truths about the practice of medicine and what it means to live, grow, and heal. James has worked behind the scenes at the New York Times for nearly 20 years and is an adjunct professor at Columbia Journalism School. He lives in Brooklyn, New York with his wife, Tolly, and their two surviving sons. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I was going to thank you for waking up early to come hear the talk, but that's your job. So thanks for doing your job. I'm James. It's great to be in Charlotte. This is the reason I'm here today. My wife and I have three amazing kids. Gilad, who was born in 2007, he's now 17, and his twin brothers, Yaniv and Nadav, they don't look alike, but they're twins. And the main reason I'm here is to talk about our 5 years with Nadav, who, as Stacy mentioned, was born with a very serious congenital heart defect, lived a remarkable life that taught us a lot about parenting, but also medicine. And that's the topic of my talk today. So I've been told that when you speak in a medical context, it's customary to give some disclosures. So here are my disclosures. I'm a dad. I'm not a doctor. I have written a memoir, which is on sale, but I think there's some free books out there if you want to read it. And this topic is very emotional. And I know even for people who are used to difficult topics, sometimes it can be a little too much. So I give you complete permission if it's too much to take a break, take a minute. That's fine. I totally get it. And there are a lot of photos. But there are reasons that I'm making these disclosures. First of all, I'm not a doctor, but I've had 5 years of intense medical training. I've written a memoir so that I can have these conversations. My main motivation is to see how our experience can help people for caring for kids like our son. And even though this topic is emotional, we are all human. And that's the main topic of my talk. So here's just a glimpse at my training. We've spent 5 years in 4 hospitals in 4 hospitals in 3 cities across 2 continents. It's a little bit unusual. And this is how my medical career began, with the news that we were expecting twins. So we actually sent like baseball cards of twins to my siblings. When I heard the news, they didn't understand at all what I was trying to say. So hopefully this talk is a little clearer. For those of you parents, you know that it's very exciting to be expecting. You start noticing little patterns everywhere. That one was interesting and meaningful. When we found out the twins' weight in utero, I thought it would be neat to like actually see how much they weighed. So I filled up these coffee jugs with their actual weights to get a sense of what my wife was going through. And they are heavy, really heavy. So a lot of empathy there. And then we had a routine anatomy scan, which unfortunately revealed a father's worst fear, which is a diagnosis that there was something wrong with the heart, which was eventually diagnosed as single ventricle heterotaxy caused by PCD. I assume you guys know what that means. Okay, cool. So suddenly we had to introduce ourselves to this whole new world, the world of doctors and medicine. Doctors were strange creatures who spoke this really opaque, obtuse language. This is an example of it right here. But luckily, at our home hospital of Mount Sinai, we met with an amazing cardiologist named Shubika Srivastava, who's now at Nemours, who drew us a picture to make it easier. There's the picture. I'm sure some of you have drawn pictures like this in the past, but tried to bridge the communication gap between doctors and mere mortals. Shubi explained that Nadav would need at least 3 surgeries by the age of 5 in the hopes that eventually he'd become a candidate for a transplant. And for some reason, because I am who I am, I just thought it was really interesting to research the history of the surgeries that he was about to do. And actually, the BTT shunt, which I'm sure you all know what that is, has a really fascinating history. How many of you know the story of the first BTT shunt? Everybody? Okay, if you don't, you should scan that QR code because it's absolutely incredible. The story of Blaylock and Vivian Thomas and Tausig, how they got together. I found it really incredible, not just for the risks that these doctors took, but the human challenges they overcame. Vivian Thomas, a black man in the South who was uh, so disregarded in the hospital context that the chief anesthesiologist did not even agree to be part of the surgery if he was there. Blaylock, who took the risk of doing a heart surgery that had never been done before. Tausig was deaf, right, as a cardinal. Like these were humans, not like gods, and I found that to be really, really interesting. Um, it is an amazing story, and there's a movie. Have you seen the movie? It's a little cheesy. Yeah, you've seen the movie. Okay, the ending is not quite right. Like the baby lives, but actually the baby died. But I'm not going to ruin it for you. Okay, I just want to like the obligatory call is like please call it a BTT shunt, not a BT shunt. Okay, because I think it's really super important. Okay, so when you are diagnosed with a kid with a heart defect, it is a source of absolute terror, right? Not just the terror that you might have to say goodbye to your child, but also the fact that you're going to have to endure 3 crazy surgeries, a BT shunt at like 5 days old, which for a parent is mind-blowing, a bidirectional bilateral Glenn, which happened at 5 months, and then a Fontan, which for Nadav happened right before his fourth birthday. The Fontan was one of these procedures that really did not go well in the middle. His pressures really dropped, and his cardiologist had to tell us that he wasn't doing well. And it was only a last minute audible to take him to the cath lab for whatever reason that actually saved his life. And for those 45 minutes, I was sort of thrust into the abyss of having to face his death. And the thing that really was difficult for me, even before he was born, was the thought that someday I would have to tell his brothers that he had died. Not just the coping with the death myself, but having to communicate that information. So I have a lot of empathy for doctors and other medical professionals who have to communicate difficult truths like that every day, because for me, I could not imagine having to have that obligation. But even though a heart defect is a source of terror, I actually really found it to be a source of wonder as well. For those of you who are parents, you know the feeling when your child is born. Certainly, we experienced this when our older son was born, that you've brought this new life into the world, right? This miracle of life, and you've created something out of nothing. It's just like absolutely incredible. You're on cloud 9. But when Nadav was diagnosed, I was forced to like consider just how magical that process was. How many of you know the role of cilia in embryonic development? Do you all know this? Yes, everybody? Okay, well, if you don't, the fact that your body starts as this tiny bundle of cells that are completely symmetrical, which have little hairs on the outside, which beat the amniotic fluid around, which lays out the proteins that determine how your body forms, right? And that determines how your organs form in the span of 3 hours. Maybe to you it seems ordinary. To me as a parent, to be forced to consider that's how life forms, it's just absolutely incredible. And I hope that some of you retain that sense of wonder in terms of the bodily processes that we come to take for granted. And that's not just embryonic development, that's even this simple act of healing. I've actually forced to really consider it. And it was a real privilege to be his father because it opened my eyes to some of the miracles that we take for granted every day. So you're forced to confront the unknown, the terrors of the unknown, and the beauty and the wonder of the unknown. And when the human brain is faced with the unknown, it tries to make connections. And if you read the book, you'll see there's many examples in our lives together that we'd notice these crazy coincidences, which were just like kind of mind blowing. This is the first one that we encountered. As I mentioned, Shubi drew this diagram of the heart, and she always started with this area here with like the 3 fingers, right? That's how she drew it. When Nadav was born, we asked Gilad, his older brother, if he'd like to do drawings for his brothers to welcome them into the world, and he said yes. And he grabbed a pink crayon. It's his first crayon, and this is what he drew. The very first thing that he drew, just like Shubi, was this little, you can see it, right? Like 3-fingered shape, right? Which is like crazy. And then I think these, you'll have to determine what these are, whether they're like odors or veins or whatever, right? Nadav's physiology was actually not far off from this, but that was just like one of the many weird coincidences that just sort of like gave us this hint that maybe there was something in the unknown. That's not like a religious thing; it's just something that's neat and profound. Having a heart defect was also like a strange source of pride. This is a diagram that uh, medical student in the NICU drew right after Nadav was born to show off his anatomy. And she did an amazing job with it. I think there's something really beautiful about that. And people would look at it like, really? Right? Like they look at these scans as if they were works of art. And so there's a pride that comes with this too. And then of course it's a source of significant obligation, because suddenly as a parent, your job is not just to parent, it's also to be sort of like the first line of caring when you return home. And this was one of my greatest terrors, actually. We were not allowed to be discharged from the hospital after the BTT shunt until I learned to place an NG tube. Um, and that scared the bejesus out of me, honestly. Like the fact that I would have to take this yellow thing and put it in my son's nose into the stomach. But I had to do it. And we had an amazing nurse practitioner who was like, it's got to be done. Here's how you do it. And I eventually mastered that. And it really became a part of my identity as a father. In fact, that's my secret talent now. I can put an NG tube in a sleeping baby in the middle of the night, pitch dark, without them waking up. So if you need any help later, I'm here for the day. I don't know if I'd like to try it. Okay, anyway, so yeah. Yes? Okay, you're gonna take me up on that. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. It's been great meeting y'all. Okay, so you get this pride in this, and it really does become part of your identity, the fact that you've mastered all these medical techniques, and you are really the person who can keep your son healthy in many ways. One of the things that really surprised me about the practice of medicine while we were going through all this was the amount of ambiguity that there was. Certainly in this field, right, where Nadav's circulation was like utterly unique because of the nature of heterotaxy. Like he's not like anybody else. But even in ordinary things, there was a lot of ambiguity. Like amoxicillin, nobody could tell us definitively whether it needed to be refrigerated or not. Right? Everybody had a different opinion, right? And so we got the sense that either like people were guessing or it didn't really matter. And that's a silly example, but that happened all the time, right? Like with the pulse ox, he had a pulse ox on his toe, which kept on falling off, and eventually we learned not to trust it. Like we could tell the stats just by looking at him, like that. And every time we came in for a checkup, there was this little kabuki theater of, you know, you got to check his stats, and the technician would put it on. It's like, wow, it's 62, and it's like it's not 62, it's 73, and then we'd have to spend 10 minutes getting it to 73 before we could go into the appointment, right? So we learned that there was a lot of ambiguity, but we also learned that as parents, we had an expertise about our son's condition that we could contribute to. That was really, really important. And this is for small things, but also big things as well. Like, should you fenestrate the fontan, right? Should you get on a plane and go to a faraway country? All these decisions are based in large part on educated guesswork and not tried and true things. That may be true of other disciplines in the medical community, but certainly for our situation, that was the sense that I got. So we learned some characteristics of the best doctors. They viewed pediatric care as a partnership. They shared knowledge without being condescending. They valued our instinct and our expertise, and they were honest and humble about what they don't know. And my wife, I just gave a talk in Orlando, CHOP Cardiology, and she said, make sure you tell them that this is really important. So I put a red box around it, okay, that you have to communicate to parents that there are things that you don't know or things that are ambiguous, because otherwise they will think when something goes wrong, they don't really go wrong, they just take a different tack, that you've made a mistake or that you've misled them or something like that. When really, I think giving a peek into the ways that you think about things and the various scenarios that can occur is a much better approach, rather than a definitive, this is what it is, or this is what we should do. Okay, so I've talked a lot about medical stuff, but there was a wise doctor at Mount Sinai who stressed to us that while he was their patient, he was our son, and not to forget to be a parent. And for us, parenting is about showing our kids the world, and it involves a lot of traveling. I say this as a man who drove here from New York City and is going to drive back over the next 3 days, right? We love to be on the road. The very first trip that we took was to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. How many of you have been there? Yeah, okay, so you know the giant heart, right? So we walk through, there's this giant heart, the Franklin Institute, that you can actually walk through. And for us, it was a remarkable experience because my wife, Tali, was like, well, you don't have this. She would knock on that. She's like, you have a big hole here, where it's supposed to be, right? So we actually walked Nadav through a heart, which was cool. We actually took a road trip. This is not my first time in North Carolina. We go to the beach every year, Topsail Beach near Wilmington. So this is actually in Wilmington. So we drove down there with the boys. We decided to pack them up and take them on an airplane. They did not fly the airplane. We went to San Diego. That's Nadav on the right and Gilad on the left. That's Yaniv down there. And then we were presented with a kind of an amazing opportunity. This is after the Fontan, to take a trip to Australia, which is a long way away, but it's a country that's near and dear to my heart because my mother is from there. My father's a New Zealander. We had taken Gilad when he was 6 months old. It was an incredibly meaningful experience, and we wanted to give our boys as much of a life as possible. So we consulted with the doctors at Mount Sinai and a lot of deliberations, and we decided that we could go. So this is us in Australia. We had 2 amazing weeks there. Really wonderful time meeting not just kangaroos and koalas, but my various assortment of cousins. And the boys loved it. And then one day we noticed that Nadav was not looking so great. So we wrote to his cardiologist in New York. And Subi said, you should get him checked out. So instead of going home, we went to the Children's Hospital at Westmead, which is in the western suburbs of Sydney. And Nadav was diagnosed with a clot in his fontan, a thrombus in his fontan, which was not great because he needed emergency surgery. And not only that, we were in this faraway country where we didn't know anybody, surrounded by strange doctors who had weird customs, and we suddenly had to think on our feet and find our way through this like crazy situation, which was not a lot of fun. Nadav was admitted for surgery at 8 o'clock in the morning, where they gave us this torture device. I hope you don't do this. Give your patients pagers and tell them not to come back until it beeps. Because any parent will sort of start to feel relieved around the 4 or 5 hour mark because you don't want a surgery to end early. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they'll start to worry a bit. By 6 o'clock, they'll be freaking out. By 9 p.m., they will be sitting, as my wife is here. There's actually taken my wife talking to another parent, trying to figure out what was going on. And it wasn't until 10 o'clock at night that we got this torture device finally buzzed. And we found out that Nadav had endured his surgery 7.5 hours on bypass, but thankfully was alive. On ECMO, which we had always been told was a last resort. And so that wasn't great, but the surgeon, to her credit, gave us a heads up beforehand that it was highly likely that he would have to come out in ECMO, that they were a little more liberal in terms of using it as something to keep him stable. Still, we were like completely freaked out. We called Shubi in New York. And we explained to her the situation, and she said, I'm praying for you. Now, we're Jewish, and she's Hindu. So I decided to ask some follow-up questions. I said, who are you praying to? Which gods, right? Because I know nothing about it. And she said, all of them. It was like a full spectrum blast. And I said, Shubi, if you could pick just one, who would it be? And she said, Hanuman. And Hanuman is the monkey god. And when we Googled him, this is crazy, and I don't think it's what Shubi meant, but if you Google him, he's often depicted as holding his chest open, and inside are the 2 deities he's sworn to protect, and there's like little drops of blood coming out, which I thought was kind of crazy coincidence. So we printed this out. We put it above his bed. This is actually the thing that we printed out. And that night, the doctors, knowing that he had to come off ECMO, took a leap of faith. They pulled the cannulas, and his heart clicked in. So that was kind of incredible. And finally, I could take a breath and relax, or so I thought. That evening, we were called in at 6 o'clock for a family meeting. You know what a family meeting is? I'm sure you have a room like this where you have family meetings with IKEA furniture. I don't know if you have like paintings done by the doctors on the walls. There's this one doctor who fancies himself an artist, and they kept on telling us that. But we found ourselves in this room surrounded by all the medical professionals and the guy in charge of the NICU, a doctor named Nick Piggott, who looked us right in the eye and said, I have to be honest with you, Nadav is not doing well. The issue is that he has a high white blood cell count and he's running a fever. And there are 3 things that could happen tonight. These are my actual notes from that moment. First is that he could improve. And I have to tell you, that's not going to happen. Second is that he could hold steady, and that's what we're hoping for. And the third is that he could deteriorate. And if that's the case, there's nothing more we can do. And all the strength that I had had to that point, like completely evaporated. I was shattered into a million pieces. But my wife, Tali, who unfortunately couldn't be here, looked him right in the eyes and said, so what you're saying is that it's up to him. And Nick looked at her and said, I suppose you're right. And Tali said, well, I can live with that. I trust him. And that was really, really profound for me, because suddenly the faith that she taught me was not in an external deity, but in Nadav himself. These mysterious life forces that cause the amniotic fluid to swirl around, that cause us to grow. She trusted that right, in him and his strength. And he actually made it through that night, and many more. I was fascinated by what it's like as somebody who might have the obligation to tell his sons, our son's bad news. I was fascinated by the doctor's perspective. How do you sit in the room and have that conversation with parents? And Nick, who was very candid about it, said, I teach my trainees three things in a family meeting. You need to be honest and direct. You can't give false hope. And you have to get the sex of the child right. And you laugh. But I have to tell you, it's just as important, okay? Because if you misgender your child, the patient, the parents will never trust you again. There will be a chasm that will be between you and the parents that you will never recover from. It is super important. It happened once to Nadav. He had these crazy curls, so somebody called him a she once, and that was just like, we can't work with you, okay? So super important. Okay, listen to Nick. Okay, so suddenly we're out of cardiology by this point. We are in the PICU at the Children's Hospital Westmead, which is the big magnet program. It's where they take all the sick kids. Every morning I would read the Sydney Morning Herald, and there would be some story that ended with the words, "The child was rushed to the Children's Hospital at Westmead," right? Okay, and then you'd go to the hospital and you'd see the kid there, the new arrival, right? So this was like tough shape, and he was the sickest kid in the ward. And the rhythms were a little different because instead of dealing with a cardiologist over time, we were dealing with new attendings every 3 days. That's how they rotate people in. And when a new attending would come on, we'd pepper them with a million questions. And the Australian doctors would say, you have to be patient because we have to get to know him. And in the American context, I would view that as like a brush off, like just let me do my job. But I realized in Australia, it was a little different. What they were saying was, it is not our job to heal your son. Only he can heal himself. It is our job to put him in the best position to give him the opportunity to heal. And I thought that was really subtle, but also really profound and really important. They really cared about him, not just as a medical chart, but as a person, right? And that was an important lesson for us. This is actually Yi Sheor, who's now at Texas Children's. He's the surgeon who did the surgery. And most surgeons, you meet them for the surgery maybe a day or two afterwards, and then they're gone. You work with a cardiologist. Yishe saw him every single day he was there. And not only that, she talked to us. After this 10-hour surgery, she sat down and talked to us for 2 hours to answer any questions we might have. Really super remarkable, because it showed sort of a point of human contact that I think is really critical. And in fact, not only did they get to know him, we got to know everybody. This is the poster that you see outside the unit with all the people's photos. We got to know every single one of these people in our 3 months there. Not just doctors, but also really important people like child life, nursing. I don't talk a lot about nurses in the presentation, but hopefully I do enough in the book. Like nursing is so critical and so important. Therapy. This is Gloria, who is a speech therapist at Children's Hospital Westmead. While Nadav was intubated, she showed up, and we said, "Why are you here? He can't talk." And she said, "Well, he can still communicate," and actually taught him to communicate using his eyes, and then eventually taught him to talk while intubated, which I had never heard was possible and was really kind of mind-blowing. So therapies are super important. And then this thing called the Heartbeats program. I don't know if you have that or something similar. The only place I've seen in the States, they had these like really drab beads. They sucked. I'm sorry. I don't know what yours are like. In Australia, they were like individual works of art. They were really, really, really beautiful. And that was important. Okay. And we gathered a string. You can tell how long it was there because they have this huge string of beads, each one representing like a memory that I think was really cool. And all this stuff had the net effect of bringing humanity into the hospital, which we learned there was really critical to his care. They do things a little differently in Australia. These are some of Nadav's doctors. I kid you not, they are clown doctors, but they were an important part of the medical team. They're actually the only doctors in Australia who wear white coats. And they have huge pockets that they pull things out of. But they're not just comic relief. They are there to bring joy and happiness when needed and appropriate into the hospital, which is a human thing, which I would posit is necessary to heal, right? To be able to smile has a really important impact on healing. And you could tell that they were highly trained because when they would come in the room, they would always give you a look or look at the doctors and just figure out like what the context, what the mood was, and then like figure out whether they should back away or come in and what sort of intervention they needed to do. Super important. But not only that, in Australia, we saw things that would never happen here, I don't think. And that was, for one thing, Nick insisted that Nadav had to go outside. Okay, this is the day after he told us that he was going to die. He said, we're going to take Nadav outside. This is a kid who's intubated. He put him on a travel ventilator. And the nurse had the big red backpack, right? And you had a couple of nurses, you had a resident join along. And this was not out of pity or palliative care or anything like that. This was, the kid needs to be outside. So we took him outside where he was able to feel the fresh air on his face. That's Nick down there. He was able to watch his brothers play in the playground, which was great. He was able to, he couldn't really smell, but he could touch flowers and leaves. At one point, Nick actually turned off the travel ventilator and there was like no noise and it was great. But I still wondered why Nick did it. And he said, I just wanted to see how he'd react. Okay. But it was like a gift for those 30 seconds to just be in the world and outside of the hospital. A real gift. In fact, without Nick's permission, one of the younger doctors decided that he was going to take Nadav outside at night. This was apparently against the rules, but we did it anyway. And he got to see the stars, which is also nice, right? It's a bad photo, but it was really dark. Okay. Still in Australia, we were stuck, super stuck. Nadav was battling an aspergillus infection. His drains were off the charts. Okay, this is his drainage over time. This is my stupid chart of that. It's on a scale of 0 to 10. At one point, he was draining 9 liters a day. He was not a candidate for any further surgery at all, and there was absolutely no medical reason to transport him anywhere. So we were really stuck until my wife, amazing wife Tali, who reads medical journals for fun, discovered this recently published paper from Jack Rome at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and some of his colleagues, describing a novel procedure that had been performed on 3 patients, one of whom died, describing a transcatheter Fontan takedown. So basically a Fontan takedown via catheterization, which was exactly what Nadav needed because he was not a candidate for surgery, but we needed to revert the Fontan to a Glen. And so we called up Shuby and said, can you ask if he's a candidate for this? Dr. Rome, uttered the magic words, I'll evaluate him, which became a medical justification to bring our kid back to the United States. Still, it was crazy risky because he's a very sick kid. CHOP had never transported somebody this sick this far. They figured out a way that they decided they would try to do it. They got an attending, Dr. Stacy Petty, 2 amazing nurses, and a respiratory therapist. They put them on a Gulfstream 3, which took off from Philadelphia, landed in Oakland, Oakland to Hawaii, Hawaii to Fiji, Fiji to Sydney, arrived in Sydney in these blue jumpsuits with the words CHOP Transport on the back and big old American flags on the shoulders, like astronauts to take our son home, which was incredible. And I have to say that it is incredibly humbling when you look at people like you who have devoted their lives to saving kids like ours, to think that you've actually made that choice. Like we had no choice to be in this world, okay, none. We would have chosen differently. You all made conscious choices to help kids like ours, and we're very grateful for that. Here's a snapshot at the bedside about to take Nadav home. This is John Kimbrough, who unfortunately died last year, who was the lead transport nurse, a really remarkable guy from North Carolina. And I have to mention that when he arrived, he's a very gregarious guy. He unzipped his jumpsuit to show us a special jersey that he was wearing underneath the jumpsuit, which was A+ great. I mean, that was really cool that he had thought to do that. So they loaded Nadav onto this plane. We couldn't fly. Tali could fly with him. I took the boys back commercial. This is in the flight. Remember, this is a kid who's draining 9 liters a day, so they had to come up with some innovative ways to deal with fresh frozen plasma, et cetera, et cetera. The takeoffs and landings were okay, but a little dicey. But 24 hours later, they landed in Philadelphia, and he was admitted that evening and underwent the procedure the next morning, which was successful, which was not a cure or anything, but it allowed us to hope for improvement rather than stability, which was a huge step for us. Still, we were not quite home yet. I took the boys back to New York, and for the next whatever, we basically flipped back and forth. It was like the boys were divorced and sharing custody of us. So that was interesting. Okay, we were at CHOP for 6 months. These are calendars. I just notes who the nurse was, what was happening. I tried to use, just to give you a sense of what parents do. I don't know if I'm representative, but like I tried to use as many official documents in here as possible. When I was writing my book, I was like, I got to get through this as quickly as possible because who's going to want to read about 6 months stuck in a hospital? Actually, parents talk to me that they're actually most fascinated in this part. So I'll share a few insights about our time there. Um, and this was not like life critical. This was him draining. The drains went down from 9 liters to like milliliters,
Really
but
good.
there was one stupid
Are you
drain
gonna
that.
be in this room, this conference room over here? How's
Hi,
everybody gonna fit in there?
welcome. Okay. I wish I'd give her a proper introduction. Okay. Uh, there's a stupid drain that we could not take out, and he couldn't go home until we could take it out. So this is what kept us there persistently. Um, while we were there, though, we insisted on being part of the medical team. Really insisted. And CHOP, to their credit, for the most part, actually treated us with that respect. That is an amazing place. Um, we rounded every day. The only time I got really, really angry, well, I got angry every so often, but the time I got really, really angry is when they skipped us for rounds. And I lost my temper. And actually, in Orlando, I met the guy who was on call that day, and we had a nice chat about that. But they never did it again. It was really, really important.
Yeah,
Right.
I was trying to take care of
Okay, good.
it. I failed.
Okay, good. If there's reverb, I'll get my guitar out. Okay. So yeah, so we insisted on being part of it, and because we had insights into, and we actually quite knowledgeable at this point, and we wanted to be part of the decision-making process. We wanted to be part of the team. Nadav too wanted to be part of the team. This is him actually learning to walk, like he had atrophied so badly. He had to learn to walk. He had to learn to write. Another call out for therapists and the work that they do. They did an amazing job. But Nadav actually wanted to be part of rounds too. So when they rounded, they would wheel him out in a wheelchair, and then they would turn that X-ray. That's an actual X-ray, so he could look at it, and he would sit there and he would ponder. And he was only 4 years old, but I think he knew quite a bit. He was quite an expert, and he was a very strong personality. He didn't like being condescended to, so he put people in their place when they talked down to him. This is him wearing these special things that you use when you're learning to walk again. And one new doctor kneeled down and said, "Have you worn your leg huggies today?" And Nadav looked her right in the eye and said, "Knee immobilizers." So he was part of it. He was part of the team. I'm not going to lecture you or scold you too much, but I'm going to take my prerogative and do this now. You have to use parents' names. You just have to. Okay, we're not mom and dad. Like we're literally not mom and dad. We're Abba and Ima. Okay, so calling us mom and dad is even more jarring, right? And I know it's tough to remember names. I am terrible with names. I will meet you all. Hopefully today, I will not remember your names. I guarantee you. I'll actually take photos of your badges so I remember who you are. But every hospital should have really big name tags for both doctors, everybody and patients with the first name in big letters, and the second name can come, or if you want to be doctor whatever, you can be doctor whatever, and it should be on both sides because so many times like it's like tucked in here or it's flipped around or there's some vaccine tag, like it's horrible. It's really bad, right? And names are like the first point of human connection. If we accept that the premise is that humanity is important in the hospital context, which I think it is, you have to use people's names, and we want to use your names too. Okay, that's my rant over. Not quite, but for the most part. Okay. Nourishment is also super important. Okay, when we were admitted to CHOP, Nadav was intubated. He was not allowed to drink, and this pissed us off because Nadav had been taking sips of water and ice chips in Australia. It was really important for him because, like I am now, your throat and your mouth gets really dry. So I'm going to do what Nadav wanted to do and take a drink of water, and CHOP would not let him do it. They would not let him do it. And this was like our first test of wills. They eventually relented and they gave us this thickener. You know this? Okay, we put it in, we called it Philadelphia water. He hated it, absolutely hated it. Like he would rather, whatever. So these ended up in the garbage. And we let him drink anyway, whatever. So that was like one battle of wills about what we thought was important. Nadav had unique tastes. When he was extubated, the first thing he asked for was sushi. So we gave him sushi. That is not his first taste of. He ate sushi quite frequently in the hospital, which was weird. Luckily, Chop had it in the cafeteria. He also his tastes had changed. We started going to the cafeteria once we started getting moving, and he kept on asking for pizza, which he never liked. And in fact, he didn't eat the pizza when we gave it to him. We realized that what he wanted was the oregano on top of the pizza in these little jars. So we had these jars piled up, and eventually he'd start eating it straight, which was weird. Like there's something about kids in this situation that their tastes change. And we've heard this before from other parents. Um, and what was really cool is as we started to explore the hospital, we discovered there was a little herb garden in a distant ward that we had not been told about. And every morning we would make the trek to this herb garden and we would collect fresh oregano for lunch, which is, I don't know if it's healthier, but tastier. Certainly, if you don't have a herb garden, you should have a herb garden. Obviously, it's not for the transplant kids, but you should have a herb garden. And actually, I'll tell you this now. I brought these little seed packets, which have my contact information on the back, but you can also plant what's inside and maybe grow your own oregano, as long as you send me a photo of it. Like, that'd be great. Okay. So we ran out of things to do. We were there for 6 months. And a hospital, even though we explored a lot, can get pretty boring after 6 months. And eventually our child life person said, is there anywhere that you haven't been in this hospital? And we said, well, in the elevators, there's this B button that we never press. What's down there? And she said, well, the kitchens. And we said, well, can we go to the kitchens? She said, well, I don't see why not. So we went down to the kitchens. And this was amazing. Not just because there were like huge industrial mixers and walk-in fridges and like all the oregano you would ever want to taste. But there were amazing people down there, like Nicole Solano, who is the head chef at Chop. I think she's still there, who actually just loved showing us around and got into a conversation with Tali, who knew about Nadav's taste and started asking her, do you have this? Do you have that? Like he really liked lamb. This is a kid from Brooklyn, New York. You can tell, right? He really liked lamb. And Tali said, well, he likes lamb. And Nicole was like, well, we have lamb on the menu. And Tali said, well, I haven't seen it. Well, we have a whole halal menu, which is all lamb. Okay, well, what sort of lamb does he like? Lamb chops. Well, we have lamb chops. Okay, so every day she started sending up these custom meals for Nadav, right? And that was great. It wasn't because we were special. It's because she cared about her role in the healing process. And we had this wonderful email exchange where she talked about how meaningful it was to be able to nourish kids. And I don't think anybody ever thinks about this, not parents, certainly in the hospital. The only time you think about the food is when it's bad. Okay, but if you have a kitchen here, maybe go down and introduce yourselves or the kids to the people making the food, and you might be surprised by what you find there. I don't know. Maybe you do that every day. I don't know. Whatever. But it's again another glimpse into the humanity of the hospital, which is really important. Sorry, all this talk about Philadelphia water, and I'm thirsty. Okay. So our experience in Australia inspired us to get outside. Okay, we knew the healing powers of fresh air. Unfortunately, in a hospital, the only people the most critical people are security guards. Really, really important people in a hospital if you're a parent, in part because if you meet a security guard, you will understand the ethos and the culture of the hospital like that from the very first moment. Every hospital we've been in, the security guards have reflected what the place is like. I haven't met your security guards yet. I'm sure they're great. This is Sterling Underwood. He was our favorite security guard, in part because when you get to know them, they let you go all sorts of places, even places that you're not supposed to go. Okay, so Sterling was a good friend, and we took advantage of this. We traveled all over the hospital. This is us outside, eating lunch. We would go outside to do therapy. We would go outside to do music therapy. That's an OT and a music therapist. We'd never been asked this before. They're like, outside? Why? And we're like, well, people want to be outside. Okay, we'll do it. Right? We ruled out all the instruments and did that. And we even went for walks around the campus, being very careful to stay within hospital grounds. And then we're like, why are we staying within hospital grounds? So we started to push the limits a little bit. There's a garage in the basement. I took Nadav down to the garage because he hadn't seen our car in 6 months. And this was our favorite car. This is a great car. And we let Nadav sit in the car. And it was just really nice for him to sit in his car. Okay, that was really cool. CHOP is right next to the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. So we started walking around campus because it's not too far, right? It's close enough. We saw Ben Franklin. We strayed a little further. We found this little pond filled with turtles by the nursing school. That was cool. And we just really started traveling everywhere we wanted. Including one day when the boys came to visit, we were like, hey, Nadav likes sitting in the car. Let's go sit in the car. So we went to sit in the car. And then I was like, what if we start the car? And then I was like, what if we just drive out of here? And we did. We drove around Philadelphia and Nadav saw Philadelphia and it was great. It was great. Okay, it was really great. This was breaking the rules, but eventually we got an actual pass to leave on Independence Day, actually, ironically, but it wasn't as much fun. It was much more fun to just go do it on your own. Okay. Um, Eventually, we managed to clear Nadav's lung. What was the problem? Lymphatics. I don't know if any of you are studying the role of lymphatics in Fontan circulations. If not, you should. It is not understood, and it is, for some reason, hugely important. There were two amazing doctors at CHOP when we were there who were doing cutting-edge work in lymphatics, Dr. Yoav Dori and Dr. Max Itkin, both of whom I recommend you seek out if you're interested in this. They're amazing people, very different personalities, but they did a lymphatic intervention in August that basically cleared the strain. And it was a last chance effort. So we're very grateful they did it. And then we found ourselves in the car for real, heading home to New York, where Tali insisted Nadav was going to go to kindergarten, which was crazy. It's crazy because this is the world champion cardiac kid on oxygen. He had an oxygen tank, showing up at PS 58 across the street from our house. The poor school nurse must have been like, right? And in fact, Tali and I started working part-time so we could be at home across the street just in case anything happened, but we thought it was important. The very first meeting was crazy because these were by law, New York has to accommodate kids, right? No matter what their condition is. And the administrators and teachers, while well-meaning, just did not know what to do with this child. And it quickly became very, very tense in the room as we were discussing the logistics of Nadav attending school. Until at one point, there was like this silence. And Mary, who was his teacher, who had not spoken to that point, looked me right in the eye and said, "Don't worry, we're human." And the moment I heard that, I was like, we're in good hands. And in fact, she is an incredible woman. This is Mary here. She actually told us not to bring Nadav in the first day because she wanted to talk to the kids. And one thing you realize when you go through this is just this unique inner strength that children have and this unique view of the world that I think actually a lot of adults can learn from. Mary just basically told them what was going on with Nadav. He has a heart problem, requires a lot of medical stuff. One of the medical things that he needs is a nasal cannula because it gives him oxygen because he needs extra oxygen to live. Most adults, when they see a kid with a nasal cannula, just like freak out and they can't look past it, right? They cannot get past the fact that this kid has a nasal cannula. Kids, when you explain to them that this is necessary to help him live, are like, I'm cool with that. And they just ignore it, right? I wish the rest of us could, but kids can. This was absolutely incredible to be part of this class. It was really great. This is Charlotte. This is Nadav's best friend in class, Debbie, his para. And he went every day. Like, we didn't expect him to go every day. He went every day, and he was so, so happy. And I'm so glad that Tali insisted on it. And she was a real advocate for making sure that he got as normal life as possible, despite all the things in his way. Okay, unfortunately, and there's no good way to say this, like the story has, oh, sorry. I want to mention one more thing before we get to the sad part. The reason that Nadav was able to come home again was because of the healing powers that I talked about, right? This natural life force. He had grown these massive collaterals. This is the only image here that's not Nadav. I couldn't find a good photo of his, but like the fact that his body grew collaterals to help balance his circulation in a way that, yes, ultimately was unsustainable, but allowed him to come home, again, was just like a testament to the fact that the body knows how to heal, right? And again, I'm filled with wonder about this. I hope you have respect for it as well, because it is something we take for granted, but also really cool. So I promised you a sad ending. There's no two ways about it. Nadav passed away that January, 8 years ago, at the age of 5. This is actually the view. I wasn't there when it happened. Tali was. This is the view that I saw when I was driving up to meet them after he had passed. And it was really sad. It sucked. I have to tell you, the thing that I feared most, I told you, was telling his brothers that he had died. I always feared that. And then when the time came, I was able to do it. I'll tell you why I was able to do it. It's because as a father, I realized that it was something that I could not explain, that there was something beyond my understanding that I had to be at peace with. And all I could do was trust children's strength and tell them the truth. So I think it's a good life lesson, actually. And so that's what I did. I told them the truth. I didn't try to explain it. I did the best I could. And I was just filled with pride at this kid and his life that he led. Was it too short? Was it too? I don't know. I'll never know, right? But that was the life he had. I'm at peace with that. Very grateful for the privilege of being his father. And I think one thing when you talk to parents in similar situations, even if they've lost their child, they will agree that parenting a rare child is a really incredible privilege, because it teaches you things that you ordinarily would not have known about the world. And it also fills you with this incredible pride and sense of identity that you did not have before. And one of the sadnesses about losing a child like this, not just because they're not there or you're never going to see them grow up, is that you've lost that part of yourself. Like, I don't have a reason to put an NG tube in it. Hopefully do not have a reason to put an NG tube in a child's mouth. All these things that I learned to do, it's like somebody told you you could not care for kids anymore. It would be devastating, and it is. So that's one of the reasons I wrote this book that you see outside. I didn't write it so you could buy it. I wrote it so if you want to buy it, that's great. If you want to buy it for other people, that's even better. But I bought it so you could read it and you could hear our story in the hopes that it will help you care for kids in similar situations. It's been very gratifying since it was published to be invited to all these incredible places and many more to come, and share our story with people like you in the hopes that it helps you become better carers. And if it does, I'd love to hear from you. That is my contact information. I gave you a call out. And I really, really would love to hear from you, honestly. And if there are other people whether they're colleagues or other professional organizations, I'm happy anytime, anywhere to share this if it's helpful. Because that's very gratifying to me to know that you've now met Nadav, and he's taught you something. That's great. As mentioned, I also have these little seed packets. I think there's a bunch in the back. Before you go, make sure you take one. It's got my contact information. And if you do plant seeds and they grow, send me a note. I'd love to see them. Cool. So I'm here for a while today. I'm happy to talk to everybody. I just want to leave you with a couple of summary points. I don't think this qualifies for continuing education credits, but just a summary of things that we learned along the way. Medicine is full of ambiguity, and miracles do happen. Some things, though, are beyond our control. Parents are part of the team. To heal is really a human thing, and doctors are human too. So like I said, I'm here for a while. Look forward to meeting all of you and continuing the conversation.
I'll just start by saying thank you for the gift of being here today.
Thank you.
Question?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I'm not telling you all to break the rules that you're going to learn as medical. Let's be clear. Okay, a lot of important rules. I'm talking about those whatever, right? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So the question was how does sort of pushing the boundaries help? Did it help him heal? I think it was critically important. I actually think the nurses knew. Okay, so I think they were making judgment calls and tacitly allowing us to do this, right? I think it was important for his care, but I also think it was really important for family care. It was important for a bunch of reasons. One is that we're humans, we're dealing with a lot of stress, right? Like, they give us those moments of joy. That's important too. And I think actually having a really healthy family environment can only help patient outcomes. So I think that's part of holistic care, is just recognizing what the family needs to be a family unit. Because I think what you're trying to do is remove obstacles to healing. And I don't think sitting in a hospital room every day watching Paw Patrol is conducive to healing. If I did that, I'd get pretty sick pretty quickly. I mean, I'd like to try it, but I don't think that's healthy, right? So I think there are a lot of judgment calls that are happening, and I think what was the neat thing about this is basically the medical team in Philadelphia allowed us to make that call, right, as his parents, using the same sort of judgment that we had learned to trust throughout his whole journey. Yeah.
that there are some decisions as physicians we can make. But I think when there is an opportunity for that decision and that ownership, we need to do that.
One way to think about it might be he's our patient, but he's your son, right? We're able to contribute to the conversation with him as your patient. You're able to contribute and inform how we parent him as our son. And sometimes those bounds are fuzzy, right? But there's give and take along the way.
What advice do you give doctors about how not to mismanage? How sometimes just, as you're a part of the care of this patient, you befriend the kid with them. How do you not lose track? How do you not let it?
Okay, so that's a great question. I'm going to digress for like a second, okay, about advice. I don't like to give advice because I'm very cognizant. I should have mentioned this at some point. Like we have a very narrow view, which is our family and our situation. Our situation was actually quite privileged and unique, right? We're lucky to have incredible care along the way. We had a crazy condition. We took a crazy decision, right? So there's nothing about our experience beyond that. But in terms of like how do doctors manage to care for the patients, I think without like totally being devastated, and I can sort of see the emotion with you right now, like being totally devastated is something that I wonder about too. Okay, so Shubi, who is this doctor who helped us make the decision to go to Australia along with her colleagues, was actually quite devastated by that decision, right? In retrospect. Um, I think it was the right decision because I think we are all smart people making informed decisions all the time, even if they don't work out. We do not make rash decisions, and I don't think most good doctors do either. So there's an element like of emotional regret that I think is one part of that. And I think that's where like caring can become like too much, is if you start like second guessing your decision making process because of things that had happened. I'm not an expert in that, but I can appreciate it and I can see it. We saw a lot of examples of doctors not caring. Okay, so we met with a gastroenterologist at Mount Sinai when we found out that he had malrotated intestines and was a splenic, and he was basically like, "Okay, you have 5 minutes of my time. Let me impart to you my wisdom." Right? That is, I think, a common dynamic. Okay, and I don't think that works for the parent. I really don't. And it reinforces the misperception of doctors as people who are having these mystical powers and can come down from on high to sprinkle their magic dust over your kid. That is not to say that the training is incredible and the knowledge is incredible and all that, right? But I think something that can show the patient that you have a human connection with them, some like degree of empathy for their situation. I think listening is super important, like taking the time to listen, which I know in our healthcare environment is very hard to find the time. But I think it's really important. Parents know when you're listening to them and when you're not listening to them. They know when they're a box to be checked, and they know when they're a human being to be treated, right? There's a lot of shades of gray once you get into like doing it, but there's also a wide gap between people who do it and people who don't. So I don't know if that completely answers your question. But I would think it's like what alcoholism. If you think you're an alcoholic, like you're not an alcoholic, right? If you're worried about like, am I caring for patients too much? You probably do care like quite a bit, and that probably does come through to them. So, yeah, yes. Mm. Okay, so it's you it's you versus them. That's how it's arranged. There's two of you and there's like 80 of them, right? And you know some of them, but some of them you don't know. Some people feel like they have to be there. Like you're usually having conversation with, but other people are there. So like it's quite intimidating. And it's a hugely stressful time because you're going to get bad news. You don't quite know what it is, right? So it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And what makes it worse is when people say dumb things. Okay, so in one of these family meetings where Nadav, we were told very straight Nadav was going to die. Okay, and at the end of the conversation, one of the cardiologists said, "Well, you shouldn't give up hope." And I was like, "What? You know, like you just told me he's going to die, and now you're telling me not to give up hope. Like, what does that mean? What are you trying to say?" And I heard later, and I don't. This is U.S. and Australia, whatever. Apparently, doctors are trained to say something like that, or some doctors are trained to say like, "Don't lose hope," or something. But it was just like so tone deaf in the room. And I think parents are like super vulnerable then. Like I was lucky. I had a wife. I have a wife, Tali, who's got incredible strength, far beyond what I have, right? And she was able to give me that strength in the room. But I think it's a really emotional time. It's a really hard time. You've just heard like the worst news of your life, and all these people are staring at you. Some of them because they like, why are they there? Why are they there? Like, why are there 80 people? I'm just sort of thinking off the cuff, but it's like, so the different experience that we had was in CHOP. And at CHOP, Nadav was cared for by Chitra Ravi Shankar. Um, and she was great. She was super great. She told us that he had 6 to 8 months to live, like in a casual conversation in the hallway. Now, we had built up the relationship with her, right? We knew each other, we trust each other. And she is unique in how she's able to deliver news with the caring. Like that's very hard to do. But that was a much more preferable experience, right? For me, a lot of parents might not want to hear it in that way, right? They might want the formalities of it. But the fact that she was just being candid with us, and I had no doubt that she cared about him or she cared about us. She was giving her prognosis as best she saw it, and I appreciated that. So those are two ends of the spectrum. I don't know where you want to fall on that, but it all sucks. You're hearing bad news. I mean, but you got to hear it. So yeah. Yep. You're a pulmonologist. I want to share a funny story about when we were in Philadelphia. They kept on saying that we need to talk to Paul Manieri at some point, and I was like, "Who's Dr. Manieri?" And they're like, "No, pulmonary." That was funny. Okay, PCD is really unique. I'm not going to tell you why. It's an amazing story. You got to read the book. I got to leave you something for the book, okay? But Nadav's brother actually, his older brother actually has PCD as well, okay? And for Gilad, it is like chronic congestion of stuffy nose. So we got like both ends of the spectrum on PCD. It's a crazy, as you know, like there's a lot of different things. Parents want to do everything they can to help their kids. And I think doctors need to say, here are the options of things that we could do. And in my experience, blending the medical literature and my experience and all that, I think that if we do this, this is likely to happen. If we do that, that's likely to happen. This is why I would choose it, right? Parents will always seek out other information. They will Google stuff, they will read medical journals, they will all that. That is not a bad thing for a parent. Parents need to be educated. The more you can give parents healthy ways to be educated, the less they're going to rely on sketchy ways, but they will do it anyway, and they will bring that to you. And Talia and I actually had a big argument in Orlando about the role of the cardiologist versus the parent, right? Like I think the cardiologist should be doing that networking and seeking out that information and bringing it back to the parents. She said the parents should be doing that and whatever. But like you have to acknowledge there's a wealth of knowledge that knowledge will help not resolve the ambiguity, but focus it on different scenarios and then present those scenarios and provide your expertise as to how we should proceed with the knowledge that may not work out as you had hoped. And you have to like prepare parents for that, right? Like there is a slim chance that this could happen. I don't think it's likely, but it could happen. Or there's a slim chance that something would blindside us. And if that's the case, then we'll reevaluate and whatever. I think that's the way I think maybe, but in terms of scenario planning, I think that's the way to approach it. Yes. That's my side of the room there. Okay, we made a deal with our older son when he was old enough to talk. We said, um, you need to be honest with us about everything. We'll be honest with you about everything, right? That is the deal that we make. If you're honest with us and something bad, we will not get angry, right? Like we wanted to have that spirit of honesty in both directions. And when the twins were born, we told Gilad everything that we could about what was going on whenever we could. Even the fact that we were told that he was not going to make it, we shared that news with him. I think hopefully in an appropriate way, but we did not want to keep things a mystery or hidden from any of them at any time. Like that was just our parenting philosophy. And I do think kids need to know even the most difficult things. And this is where like child life absolutely shines and is a critical investment in any pediatric context, right? Like it is just so stupid to cut child life out from this because the health of the family depends on a shared knowledge about like what's happening, because otherwise kids will imagine all sorts of wonderful things and it'll have really, really bad effects. So that's my philosophy when it comes to like telling kids things. And kids can handle it. Like they are strong and they can handle it. Right. Yeah.
Discuss you think that may be a little more cutting edge and the uncertainty there. I know that the CHOP lymphatic system program got a little bit of negative press, what was it, about a month ago, right? And Times. I'm just curious, like, as a former patient of that program, how did you kind of interpret that story, and how do you think about what was done for your son that really had never been done before? It's been tried 3 times before with a 33% mortality rate.
Okay. So I work for the New York Times, so I know what I can speak to
Okay.
with authority and what I can't. And I'm not going to comment about that specific situation. Okay. But I will share my like, okay, so my personal opinion. Been 80 years since the first heart surgery.
Yeah.
Okay. In another 80 years, what I just present to you will be a trivial thing for people to deal with. Well, your baby was born, he had single ventricle, but we took care of it. Okay, that's what's going to happen in 80 years. And we are on like the middle of that arc. And every year we learn something new. In fact, at CHOP Cardiology, we're at a session with doctors, like surgeons, talking about it. And one of the surgeons said, "Oh, now I'll use the 24 instead of the 18 after that talk." And Talia looked at me and she's like, "I told you that you should have used the 24, right?" Because she's really geeky about, I'm not that geeky about like the minutia of it. But you're always learning things, always, always, always learning things. Okay. I think the Fontaine will be perceived as barbaric in the future. Okay. Like it's torture. It's the only thing we have, right? It's the only option we have for kids right now. And I think, you need to be honest with it is the best we can with the information that we know. The lymphatic stuff saved Nadav's life, allowed us to come home, right? He had a lymphatic procedure in Australia that did nothing. Somebody who thought that they could wing it and just sort of because they were searching for everything they could. And we made that choice as a team, and we knew that it was kind of like a crazy off the map thing. But there are times where you shouldn't do crazy off the map things too, right? Like Nick said to us, if somebody was offering to operate on Nadav now, would be very suspicious of his motives, right? Okay, so that's where you rely on the expertise, but you have to be like honest that this is an innovative field which is changing all the time, and there are so many unknowns that you may learn in a year or two of the wrong decision, right? Like we just don't know. Absolutely. Yeah, this is all palliative care. I mean, this is not a cure, right? It's also to get him to get a transplant, right? We had long arguments. We thought he was a candidate for a transplant. We tried to convince Pittsburgh. We tried to convince Boston. Everybody was like, "Oh, he's got a crazy circulation, so heart lung." Like we pushed it. Parents are going to push, and you've got to be cognizant of that and say, "Hey, there's a great slide that we saw in Orlando, which like, unknowns of complexity and unknowns." Right. And you have to figure out where you lie on that. There are some things that we know really well and they inform decision making. There's some things that are less well known, but it's all about that calculus and involvement parts in it. Yeah.
We are past time. I'm sure we could talk to you all day and really learn from your wisdom. Appreciate you sharing your story, your son's story, your family story with us today. And I think we'll all be better caregivers for Constance.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, I am here for a while. I'm always available online, so I'd love to continue the conversation if you're interested. Yep. I'm here today, so yeah. Yeah, and don't leave without your seeds. Somebody has them. Great.